Hello there, fellow dreamers. Before we get started, I want you to know that I wish the best of sleep to you. This story is about a 14-year-old boy named Steven Universe. You may have heard his name before. Him and his family are about to go on a peaceful adventure into their minds, souls, and emotions. If you enjoy these stories and want to hear more of them, put your recommendations in the comments on what you want the next story to be about and hit that tiny subscribe button. Now, without further ado. The sky above the beach was painted with soft hues of purple and pink as the sun gently set, casting a peaceful glow across the horizon. The world felt still, like the earth was holding its breath. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of salt water mixed with the sweetness of flowers from nearby bushes. The gentle lapping of the waves against the shore sounded like a lullaby, familiar and soothing. Steven stood by the water's edge, his feet sinking slightly into the soft sand. His eyes gazed out at the endless ocean, the calmness of the waves matching the quiet in his heart. He felt weightless, not just in his body, but in his mind, as if the world was allowing him to just be, without any need to rush or worry. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The sound of the ocean, the whisper of the wind through the trees, the faint crackle of distant voices, it all seemed to fade into a soft hum, like a song only the earth knew. There was no urgency, no pressing need for anything. It was just this moment, this peaceful quiet, stretching endlessly before him. He let his body relax, his shoulders sinking as he stood, feeling the cool breeze drift over his skin. The stars had started to appear, twinkling faintly in the sky, each one a tiny light in the vast darkness. The night seemed endless, peaceful, and timeless. It was as if the universe itself was in a deep, restful slumber, and everything was perfectly aligned. A soft voice, familiar and comforting, came from a distance. Amethyst was laughing quietly, her voice carrying on the breeze. Pearl hummed to herself, her melody soft and thoughtful. Garnet's calm presence was always near, a silent protector in the quiet night. They were all there, even if they weren't close, and their gentle, reassuring energy filled the space around Steven. The ocean's rhythm was steady, slow, and soothing. It felt like the world was breathing, and Steven was breathing with it, his chest rising and falling in time with the waves. There was no need for words. The silence between the waves, between the stars, was enough. Steven's eyes fluttered closed, his body swaying gently with the breeze. The world felt soft, warm, like a blanket wrapped snugly around him. His thoughts drifted like leaves carried by a slow current, and the quietness of the night wrapped him in a peaceful, gentle embrace. He didn't have to do anything, didn't have to think about anything. There was no place to be, no one to save. He could just let go, float on the calm waves of sleep. The stars blinked above, the ocean whispered below, and everything in between was a soft, steady hum. It was a place of peace, a place where nothing needed to happen except for this: the calm, the stillness, the quiet drift towards sleep. And in that moment, everything was perfect. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a soft, silver glow over the landscape. The beach was bathed in its light, and the sound of the waves continued their slow, rhythmic dance. Steven's breathing slowed, each inhale drawing in the cool night air, and each exhale releasing any tension left in his body. The world around him felt like it was made of nothing but calm. No urgency, no worry. The sand beneath his feet was cool now, the warmth of the day having faded into the cool embrace of night. He shifted slightly, feeling the grains slip between his toes, a sensation that felt almost grounding, like the earth itself was holding him gently in place. Far off, the faint hum of the gems continued. Amethyst's playful giggles, far away but full of warmth. Pearl's soft humming like a lullaby carried on the wind. Garnet's silent strength, a constant presence in the background, grounding everything. The stars twinkled above, a million tiny pinpricks of light scattered across the heavens, as if the universe itself were watching over him, ensuring he was safe, at peace. Steven let his mind wander freely, his thoughts drifting like leaves on the water. He imagined the beach stretching on forever, the shoreline curving around him in a gentle embrace. The ocean whispered ancient stories, tales of forgotten places, of deep waters where mysteries slept. It was all so far away, but it felt so close, as though the stories were part of him, part of the world around him, always waiting to be heard. He thought about the gems, about all the times they had shared, the lessons they had taught him, the strength in their quiet moments, the beauty in their differences, the way they all cared for one another. And in that moment, Stephen felt the warmth of that love settle around him, like a soft, comforting blanket. It was the kind of love that could heal, that could calm, that could bring peace in the darkest of times. The waves continued to lap against the shore, slow and steady. Each wave felt like a heartbeat of the earth, steady and sure. And as the night deepened, the world seemed to slow, as if everything was gently drifting toward rest. Stephen's eyes fluttered closed again, the stars above becoming nothing more than soft, glowing shapes in his mind. He imagined himself floating above the ocean, drifting peacefully, weightless, carried by the current of sleep. There were no thoughts now, only the gentle rhythm of the night, the soft hum of the world around him. He was safe. He was home. The ocean, the stars, the quiet hum of his family, all wrapped him in the warmth of the night. It was a peaceful, endless night where nothing ever needed to change. Everything was as it should be, and all Stephen had to do was let go, to drift into the soft embrace of sleep. And so, as the world continued its gentle rhythm, Stephen let himself sink deeper into the calm, into the quiet, his breath steady and slow. The world around him faded away, and he floated into a peaceful, restful sleep, knowing that tomorrow would come. But for now, there was only peace. And in that peace, everything was exactly where it needed to be. The night was calm, the ocean barely stirring as the tide rolled in with a soft, breathy sigh. Stephen lay still beneath the stars, his body sinking into the cool sand. His breath moved in time with the sea, slow, steady, effortless. The air was crisp and clean, touched by salt and the faint sweetness of night-blooming flowers. The stars above pulsed gently, casting pale silver light over the water's surface, which shimmered and broke apart with every soft wave. Amethyst's footsteps stirred the sand again, her steps uneven, lazy, as though she wasn't quite sure where she was going. Stephen could hear her kicking at the sand, a soft huff of breath escaping her lips. A moment later, a seashell skidded across the beach, tumbling to a stop near his hand. Amethyst chuckled, her laugh low and careless, before her steps wandered further down the shore. Pearl was quieter. Her movements were measured and deliberate, the sound of her feet pressing into the sand barely louder than the pull of the tide. Stephen could picture her sitting near the water, hands folded in her lap, watching the moonlight ripple across the ocean's surface. Her breath would be even, her gaze steady. She wouldn't say anything. She didn't need to. Garnet stood at the edge of the water, her silhouette dark against the pale shimmer of the waves. Stephen could sense her presence without looking. The quiet weight of her certainty settled over the beach like a protective shield. The ocean rolled over her feet, but she didn't move, her frame perfectly still as though rooted to the sand beneath her. The sound of the waves softened, becoming a distant hum. Stephen's body grew heavier, his limbs sinking deeper into the sand. The night air pressed gently against his skin, cool and thin. His thoughts slipped beneath the surface of sleep, scattered shapes and soft colors swirling and fading beneath closed eyelids. Amethyst's laugh drifted through his mind, blending with the soft rustling of the palm trees above. Pearl's quiet hum was just a thread beneath the noise of the ocean. Garnet's steady presence settled beneath it all, a quiet anchor holding everything in place. Stephen's breath deepened. The sound of the waves thinned to a distant echo. His arms and legs were heavy now, the cool sand beneath him molding to the shape of his body. His thoughts became thinner and thinner until they dissolved completely, leaving nothing but the quiet hum of the night. A flicker of light passed over the sky, a pale streak that cut through the darkness before disappearing. Stephen didn't bother opening his eyes this time. He smiled faintly, his lips barely moving. The sound of the ocean curled around him, soft and distant. His chest rose and fell. His limbs were weightless. The night pressed in around him, thick and dark. The stars above blurred, their faint glow fading into a soft haze. Stephen's breath slowed even more. His mind emptied completely. And as sleep finally claimed him, The ocean whispered one last time against the shore, the sound drifting away beneath the stars. A low rumble stirred the air, faint at first, almost hidden beneath the sound of the ocean. Stephen's breath hitched as the sand beneath him trembled. His eyes fluttered open just in time to see a soft glow breaking through the darkness. A thin pulse of violet light stretching across the water. The waves shimmered beneath it, bending unnaturally, as though some unseen force was pulling them toward the horizon. Stephen sat up, brushing sand from his arms as his eyes adjusted to the shifting. A low rumble stirred the air, faint at first, almost hidden beneath the sound of the ocean. Stephen's breath hitched as the sand beneath him trembled. His eyes fluttered open just in time to see a soft glow breaking through the darkness, a thin pulse of violet light stretching across the water. The waves shimmered beneath it, bending unnaturally, as though some unseen force was pulling them toward the horizon. Stephen sat up, brushing sand from his arms as his eyes adjusted to the shifting light. A thin line of pale purple glowed beneath the water's surface, cutting a jagged path toward the shore. The breeze sharpened, carrying a chill that raised the hairs on the back of his neck. The ocean's rhythm faltered, the waves pulling back faster than before, leaving long stretches of wet sand glistening beneath the moonlight. Amethyst was the first to notice. Her eyes narrowed as she stood at the edge of the water, her stance suddenly tense. Stephen, she called, her usual lazy tone sharpened by a note of unease. Stephen rose to his feet, the cool sand pressing beneath his toes. "What is that?" he whispered. His gaze followed the strange light as it flickered and twisted beneath the water's surface. Pearl was already moving, her footsteps quick and focused. "It's a disruption," she said, her eyes sharp as they reflected the purple light. She crouched down near the water's edge, her fingers skimming the air just above the shifting surface. "But this isn't normal." Her brow furrowed, her expression tightening. "It's coming from beneath the seabed." Stephen's chest tightened. A new sound joined the low hum of the ocean, a deep vibration that rolled through the sand beneath his feet. Garnet stepped forward, standing at the edge of the water, her arms crossed over her chest. The purple light glinted off her visor as her gaze sharpened beneath it. "It's waking up," Garnet said calmly. Stephen's heart jumped. "What's waking up?" Before anyone could answer, the ocean pulled back suddenly, fast and violent. Stephen stumbled forward as the sand beneath his feet shifted. The light beneath the water pulsed brighter, and then a jagged crack split through the seabed. A dark shape began to rise from the depths. Amethyst's eyes widened. "Oh, that's not good." The water burst upward in a towering spray, the force of it sending Stephen stumbling backward. He hit the sand hard, the impact knocking the breath from his chest. Amethyst was already moving, pulling him to his feet as a dark figure emerged from the crashing water. Its body was massive, tall and jagged, cut from dark stone and lined with glowing purple veins. Its head turned slowly toward the beach, two pale eyes flickering beneath a heavy brow. "Stephen, behind me!" Garnet's voice was steady as she stepped in front of him, her fists glowing with crimson light. Stephen's breath came fast and shallow, but he forced himself to stand his ground. The creature's eyes narrowed, its head tilting as it studied them. Amethyst crouched low, her whip already uncoiled and glinting beneath the pale glow of the moonlight. Pearl's stance sharpened, her spear forming in her hand with a bright flash of light. The creature's head twitched, and then it moved, fast. A heavy arm lashed out toward the shore, sending a spray of sand and water into the air. Garnet's fist shot forward, catching the blow with a sharp burst of light. The force of it sent vibrations through the ground beneath Stephen's feet. Stephen's hands clenched into fists at his sides. His heart hammered against his chest. His eyes locked on the glowing shape beneath the creature's jagged surface, a shard of purple light pulsing at the center of its chest. "I can stop it," Stephen said, stepping forward. "Stephen, wait," Pearl called. Stephen didn't wait. His feet hit the sand as he rushed toward the creature, heart pounding in his ears. The glow of the purple light brightened as the creature's head turned toward him. Stephen's breath steadied as his feet dug into the sand. His hands began to glow faintly with soft pink light. He reached out toward the creature, his heart lifting as warmth bloomed beneath his palms. "It's okay," Stephen whispered. "I've got you." The creature's eyes flashed. The purple glow beneath its chest flickered. And then, the light began to soften. The creature's glow faded, its jagged form beginning to dissolve as Stephen's light wrapped around it. The dark figure trembled, and then its heavy limbs began to soften, breaking apart into thin tendrils of violet mist that drifted upward toward the sky. A quiet hum filled the air, a low, peaceful sound. The ocean's restless waves steadied, falling back into their soft, even rhythm. Stephen lowered his hands, breath steadying as the last flicker of violet light dissolved into the night. Garnet stepped forward, her expression calm beneath the dim glow of her visor. Amethyst and Pearl stood nearby, the tension easing from their bodies as the ocean's pulse returned to normal. Stephen's gaze shifted toward the horizon, where the faintest outline of a dark shape still lingered beneath the surface of the water. "It came from down there," he said quietly. Pearl followed his gaze, her brow furrowing. "Yes, and whatever woke it up, it's still down there." Amethyst grinned, rolling her shoulders. "Well, only one way to find out." Stephen's eyes widened. "Wait, you mean down there?" "Of course," Garnet said. "We need to know what's beneath the surface." Pearl's lips pressed into a thin line. "But it's dangerous. We don't know what else could be waiting down there." "All the more reason to check it out," Amethyst said, smirking as she flicked her whip back into her palm. "Besides, it's not like we've never handled danger before." Stephen took a shaky breath, but his heart beat with quiet excitement beneath the lingering weight of the night. He stepped toward the water, the cool foam washing over his ankles. The sea stretched out before him, dark and endless beneath the stars. The idea of descending beneath those waves stirred something deep in his chest. Fear, yes, but also curiosity. A quiet pull toward the unknown. Garnet stepped into the water, her steady form slicing through the shallows. Pearl hesitated for only a moment before following. Amethyst was already waist-deep, laughing as the waves swirled around her. Stephen took one more breath, then waded forward, the cold seeping into his legs as the water rose higher and higher. "Stick close to me," Garnet said softly as Stephen reached her side. "Don't worry, Stephen," Amethyst added, tossing her wet hair over her shoulder. "If something grabs you, I'll hit it real hard." Stephen smiled faintly. Comforting. The water reached their shoulders now, the dark swell of the waves pulling gently at their bodies. Stephen's feet began to lift from the sandy floor as the current carried him further from the shore. Garnet's hand brushed against his shoulder, a quiet reassurance. "Okay," Pearl said, her spear forming with a quiet flash of light. "Brace yourselves. We're going deep." Stephen took a breath just as Garnet's hand closed around his wrist. Amethyst grabbed his other arm, and then, with a sharp tug, they dove beneath the surface. The ocean's cool weight wrapped around Stephen instantly. His breath held as the world narrowed into shifting blue and black shapes. The moonlight faded quickly as they descended. Bubbles curled around his face as the gem's light guided the way. Amethyst's soft purple glow, Pearl's pale white shimmer, Garnet's deep crimson pulse. The water thickened as they sank deeper. Strange shapes flickered beneath them, dark silhouettes that curled and moved through the depths. A long, thin shape slid past Stephen's shoulder, disappearing into the shadows. His heart hammered against his chest, but Garnet's steady grip kept him grounded. A shape began to form in the distance, a vast, dark outline against the deep blue. Stephen's breath hitched. It was massive, a sprawling formation of jagged stone, twisted coral, and broken crystal. Pulses of faint violet light flickered beneath its surface, mirroring the glow they had seen on the creature above. "What is that?" Stephen whispered, his voice vibrating through the water. Pearl's eyes narrowed. "It looks ancient." The ocean stirred. A low vibration rolled through the water as the shape's edges began to shift. Fragments of stone broke away, sinking slowly into the depths. Suddenly, a soft golden light flickered through the cracks in the structure. Amethyst's eyes widened. Guys?" A deep hum rolled through the water, a pulse of sound that made the ocean ripple around them. The golden light brightened, spreading through the cracks in the stone. A narrow gap opened at the base of the formation. Stephen's gaze locked on it. It's an entrance. Well, Amethyst said, grinning. No turning back now. Stephen's breath steadied. His heart still hammered against his chest, but beneath the fear there was something else. Wonder. Curiosity. A quiet pull toward whatever lay beneath the ancient stone. Let's find out what's inside, Stephen said, and together they swam toward the waiting light. The golden light pulsed gently as they approached the entrance. The jagged stone walls curved inward, forming a dark tunnel that stretched down into the depths. Thin tendrils of glowing seaweed swayed along the edges, their pale fronds drifting lazily in the ocean's slow current. Stephen hesitated just before the entrance, peering into the dark passage. The golden glow flickered faintly ahead, lighting the path just enough to reveal uneven steps cut into the stone beneath a thin layer of sand. Amethyst swam up beside him, her purple glow catching the edge of the stone wall. "Kinda creepy," she said, her grin widening. "I like it." Pearl drifted closer, her spear held loosely at her side. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the passage. "This architecture, it's not gem-built," she said, her voice thin beneath the weight of the water. "It's older than the gems?" Stephen asked. His voice came out muffled, the sound bending beneath the water's pressure. Pearl's brow furrowed. "Possibly." Garnet moved to the front of the group, her visor glowing faintly as the light reflected against the stone. "Stay close," she said. "There's something alive down there." Stephen's heart skipped. "Alive?" Garnet didn't answer. She drifted forward, her powerful frame cutting through the water with quiet ease. Amethyst followed, flipping lazily through the current as her hair floated around her shoulders. Pearl hesitated for only a moment before swimming after them, her spear held steady at her side. Stephen took a breath, or tried to. The pressure of the water tightened around his chest, but his body felt light as the current nudged him forward. He swam toward Garnet's back, his hands brushing the cool, rough surface of the stone wall as he passed through the entrance. The tunnel narrowed quickly, the golden light pulsing softly along the edges. Strange carvings appeared in the stone, curved patterns that twisted and curled like vines. Stephen's hand brushed over one of the carvings, and the stone beneath his fingers gave off a faint, warm pulse. Ahead, the tunnel widened into a circular chamber. The walls were lined with long, thin crystals, some broken, some glowing faintly with soft amber light. At the center of the room, a massive circular platform sat slightly elevated, carved from black stone. The edges were etched with more of the curling patterns, and the surface pulsed faintly with golden light. "Whoa," Stephen breathed. Amethyst drifted to the edge of the platform. "What is this place?" Pearl moved toward the carvings along the wall, her hand skimming across the patterns. "These designs, they're similar to gem technology, but different, more organic." Stephen floated toward the center of the platform. His feet brushed the cold stone beneath him. The golden light beneath the surface pulsed gently, in time with his heartbeat. He reached down, placing his hand flat against the center of the platform. Warmth surged beneath his palm. The pulse quickened. Stephen?" Amethyst's voice sharpened. A deep vibration rolled through the room. The light beneath Stephen's hand brightened, spreading through the carvings. The platform trembled beneath his feet, and then a loud click echoed through the chamber. Stephen pulled his hand back. The floor beneath him shifted. The platform's edges began to slide downward, revealing a spiral staircase that disappeared into the dark water below. Thin tendrils of golden light curled along the edges of the steps. Garnet's gaze sharpened. "It's opening." Pearl's eyes widened. "That means it's been sealed for a long time." Stephen's heart hammered against his chest. His breath curled against the water as he stared down into the dark passage beneath the platform. He swallowed hard. "Do we go down?" he asked. Amethyst swam up beside him, grinning. "You even have to ask?" Stephen hesitated for only a moment longer. Then he placed his foot on the first step. It held beneath his weight. The golden light pulsed faintly beneath his foot. Garnet moved beside him, steady as always. "I'll lead." "I'll cover the rear," Pearl said, her expression tense but steady. Stephen glanced at Amethyst. She gave him a thumbs up before flipping through the water and drifting lazily down the first few steps. Stephen exhaled slowly. Then he took another step. And another. The staircase wound downward, curling through the stone like a spiral shell. The golden light thinned as they descended, becoming thin lines of pale amber that stretched along the walls. Strange shapes moved through the water beyond the edges of the stairs, shadowy figures that pulsed with dim blue light. Stephen's gaze followed them warily as they passed. The deeper they went, the colder the water became. Stephen's arms and legs began to feel heavier. The pressure increased, pressing in around his chest and shoulders. His breath came slow and steady, but his heart pounded against his ribs. He reached out toward Garnet's hand, and her fingers brushed against his knuckles, steady, reassuring. "I see something," Pearl said. Stephen squinted through the dim light. At the base of the staircase, another archway stood half-buried beneath a curtain of drifting seaweed. A soft violet light pulsed behind it, barely visible through the dark. "That's the same color as that creature," Stephen whispered. Pearl's gaze narrowed. "Be careful." Garnet moved toward the archway first. Her hand brushed aside the seaweed. Beyond it was another chamber, larger than the first. The walls were smooth, cut from dark stone and polished to a soft sheen. Thin streams of violet light curled through cracks in the stone. At the center of the room, a tall pedestal stood beneath the soft glow, and resting on the pedestal was a shard of violet crystal, smooth and jagged, pulsing faintly with light. Stephen's chest tightened. "Is that?" Pearl floated closer, her eyes wide. "It's a gem fragment," she said, her voice hushed with quiet awe. "A corrupted gem?" Stephen asked. "No," Pearl said. "It's incomplete." Garnet's expression darkened beneath her visor. "That's not all." A sound stirred beneath them, a deep, low rumble. The stone beneath their feet vibrated. The violet crystal pulsed brighter. A dark shape unfolded at the far side of the chamber. A figure began to rise, a massive form of dark stone and violet light, its long limbs curling through the water like shadowy tendrils. Two pale eyes flickered open beneath a jagged brow. Stephen's breath caught. "It's waking up!" Amethyst shouted. The figure's mouth opened, a low, vibrating sound rolling through the water. Stephen's feet planted against the stone floor. His hands began to glow faintly with soft pink light. "I've got this," Stephen said, his voice steady. The creature's eyes locked on him. Stephen raised his hand toward the pulsing crystal, and then the room exploded with light. The light swallowed the chamber in a blinding flash. Stephen shielded his eyes with his arm as the pulse of energy rolled through the water, a deep vibration that echoed in his chest. The creature's massive form reeled back, its dark tendrils curling inward as the violet glow flickered unevenly along its jagged body. Stephen's feet lifted from the ground as the current rushed past him, pulling at his limbs. "Stephen!" Pearl's voice was sharp and distant through the haze of light. Stephen's vision cleared just in time to see the creature lunge toward him. Its massive, clawed arms sliced through the water, shadows trailing behind them like smoke. Garnet moved in a blur, her gauntlets forming with a sharp burst of red light. She struck the creature's arm, knocking it back with a low thud that sent tremors through the stone floor. "Move," Garnet ordered. Stephen pushed himself back as Amethyst's whip flashed through the water, wrapping around the creature's limb. She yanked hard, her body twisting as the dark tendrils resisted her pull. "Come on, big guy," she taunted. "Is that all you've got?" The creature's eyes pulsed brightly. A low vibrating sound filled the chamber, a deep hum that made the walls tremble. Cracks began to spread through the stone as thin beams of violet light flickered from the creature's body. "It's destabilizing," Pearl shouted, swimming toward Stephen with her spear glowing in her hand. "We need to contain it. Quickly." Stephen's eyes narrowed. He glanced toward the pedestal where the crystal shard still pulsed with faint violet light. His heart thudded against his ribs. "It's connected to the shard." Stephen swam toward the pedestal. "Stephen!" Pearl's voice caught as the creature's shadow loomed behind him. Stephen stretched out his hand toward the shard. His fingertips brushed the cool surface of the crystal. A shock of cold ran through his arm, and suddenly the world narrowed, darkness pressing in at the edges of his vision. A wave of noise crashed through his mind. A voice. Distant? Hollow. "Who are you?" Stephen's breath hitched. The crystal's pulse quickened beneath his hand. "Why are you here?" Stephen's gaze sharpened. The creature's massive form loomed over him, the dark tendrils curling toward his outstretched arm. "I'm Stephen," he shouted. His voice vibrated through the water. "And I'm here to help you." The creature's pale eyes narrowed. Its tendrils shot forward, wrapping around Stephen's wrist. A sharp chill shot through his arm. "Help?" Stephen's eyes squeezed shut. His hand burned where it touched the crystal. He pushed past the cold, past the fear. "Yes!" Stephen's hand glowed with soft pink light. "You're hurt. I can feel it. Let me help." The creature's grip tightened. Stephen's chest seized. He could feel the dark pulse of energy running through the crystal, fractured, uneven. Whatever had corrupted it, it was still lingering beneath the surface. Stephen's breath steadied. His heart hammered in his chest. He focused on the light, on the warmth beneath his palm. "You're not alone," Stephen said quietly. His hand glowed brighter. "You don't have to fight anymore." The creature's pale eyes widened. The dark tendrils slackened slightly around Stephen's arm. Stephen pressed his hand flat against the crystal. His pink light spread through the cracks in the shard, weaving through the violet glow. The creature shuddered. Its jagged form began to soften. The edges of its limbs dissolved into thin curls of violet mist. The white glow in its eyes faded to a soft, pale blue. Stephen exhaled slowly. The creature's form curled inward, shrinking as the tendrils unraveled. The crystal beneath Stephen's hand pulsed one last time, bright, warm, and then dimmed to a faint, steady glow. The creature drifted backward, its body dissolving into thin trails of soft violet light. Pearl's hand touched Stephen's shoulder. He turned to see her wide, relieved eyes. "You did it," Pearl whispered. Amethyst swam up beside them, grinning. "That was awesome!" Stephen's heart still hammered against his ribs. He stared down at the crystal shard, now resting quietly in the pedestal's shallow curve. A thin thread of pink light curled through its surface. Garnet swam forward, her gauntlets fading as she crouched beside Stephen. "It's stable now," she said. Stephen's breath slowed. "It's not corrupted anymore?" Garnet shook her head. "No, you healed it." Stephen's lips parted. He lifted the shard from the pedestal. Its surface was warm beneath his hand. A quiet hum filled the chamber. The golden lines along the walls brightened faintly. Pearl's eyes softened. "Stephen." Stephen smiled. His chest still felt tight, but the weight was lighter now. His hand curled around the crystal shard as the last trails of violet mist dissolved into the water. "Let's go home," Garnet said softly. Stephen nodded. He followed as Garnet led them back toward the staircase. Amethyst drifted lazily behind them, her eyes lingering on the fading glow of the chamber. Pearl swam beside Stephen, her spear dissolving as the tension left her shoulders. As they swam upward, the golden light along the walls began to dim, returning to a soft, peaceful glow. Stephen glanced down at the shard in his hand. Its light pulsed gently beneath his fingers. A quiet warmth settled beneath his ribs. They rose toward the surface. The dark ocean parted above them, and the pale light of the moon filtered through the water. Stephen broke through first, gasping softly as the cool night air met his face. The ocean's surface was calm now, the water stretching out in quiet ripples beneath the starlit sky. Stephen floated on his back, the shard resting quietly in his hand. Garnet surfaced beside him. Amethyst splashed up from beneath the water, grinning. Pearl emerged a moment later, brushing her damp hair away from her face. Stephen's chest rose and fell as he stared up at the sky. His heart was still steady beneath the quiet pulse of the crystal. "That was intense," Amethyst said, laughing. "But it's over now," Pearl said softly. Stephen smiled faintly. His hand tightened around the shard. "Yeah?" he said. "It's over." They floated beneath the stars, the ocean's quiet pulse steady beneath them. The night stretched out calm and endless above the water. Stephen closed his eyes. The weight of the ocean rocked gently beneath him. His breath slowed. His heartbeat steadied. The shard pulsed once in his hand. Soft, steady warmth. Stephen smiled, and the ocean carried him into quiet sleep beneath the stars. Stephen's eyes shot open. A cold shiver ran down his spine as he floated beneath the starry sky. The quiet pulse of the ocean beneath him had shifted. Something felt wrong. The crystal shard in his hand pulsed, faster and sharper than before. "Stephen!" Pearl's voice cut through the quiet night. Stephen sat up just as a sudden wave rolled toward them, the surface of the water trembling unnaturally. Garnet's visor gleamed in the moonlight as she turned toward the disturbance. Amethyst kicked lazily through the water, her expression sharpening. Guys? Amethyst's grin faded. What's that? Stephen turned toward the horizon. A dark shape was rising beneath the water, a long, jagged shadow curling toward them like a tendril of smoke. A low, vibrating hum spread through the ocean. The water beneath Stephen's feet darkened. Another one? Stephen whispered. No. Garnet's voice was sharp. It's bigger. Without warning, the water exploded beneath them. A massive shape surged from the depths, a towering mass of dark stone and violet light, its jagged limbs spiraling upward. Two bright white eyes flickered open beneath a crown of twisted crystal. A wave crashed over Stephen, pulling him beneath the surface. He twisted, kicking toward the light above. Pearl's hand shot down, grabbing his wrist and pulling him back up. Stephen! Stephen gasped as his head broke the surface. Garnet was already moving, her gauntlets flashing as she shot through the water toward the creature. We need to keep it contained, Garnet shouted. On it! Amethyst's whip lashed through the water, snapping against one of the creature's limbs. The creature roared, a deep, distorted sound that made the water tremble. Its limbs shot forward. Garnet intercepted one with a powerful strike, sending a shockwave rolling through the water. Stephen's pulse hammered in his ears. He glanced down at the shard in his hand. It was glowing brighter, pulsing in time with the creature's distorted light. It's connected, Stephen realized. Stephen! Pearl's spear flashed toward him. Focus! Stephen's chest tightened. He swam toward Garnet, the shard pulsing hot in his hand. His pink glow began to spread through the water. Hey! Stephen shouted. Over here! The creature's pale eyes locked on him. Its limbs shot forward. Stephen raised his hand wide. A wall of pink light erupted between him and the creature, the force of the impact knocking Stephen backward. He tumbled through the water, breath leaving his chest. Stephen! Amethyst's whip wrapped around his arm, yanking him upright. Stephen coughed, shaking the dizziness from his head. The shard burned in his palm. The creature's glow flickered violently. I can stop it! I just need to! Stephen's gaze sharpened. He kicked toward the creature. It's like the pink glow in his hand intensifying. I know you're hurting! Stephen shouted. Let me help you! The creature's jagged limbs shot toward him. Garnet intercepted them with a crushing strike, her gauntlets flashing red. Stephen surged upward, the shard's glow reaching out toward the creature's pulsing core. The crystal's light pierced through the dark. Stephen stretched his hand toward it. I can fix this! The creature's glow twisted violently. Its limbs spasmed. Stephen's hand touched the core. A burst of light erupted between them. Stephen's vision blurred as the pulse of energy rolled through the water, tearing the dark limbs apart from the inside. The creature's form unraveled, light breaking into thin tendrils of violet mist. Stephen's body floated weightless in the sudden quiet. Pearl's arms wrapped around him, pulling him upward. Stephen's breath came in ragged gasps as they surfaced beneath the quiet sky. It's gone! Pearl whispered. Stephen's hand opened. The crystal shard lay still in his palm, its light soft and steady. Garnet's hand touched his shoulder. You did it, she said quietly. Stephen's breath steadied. His heart still hammered beneath his ribs, but the pulse of the shard had quieted. Amethyst floated up beside them, grinning. Okay, now that was awesome! Stephen smiled faintly. His arms floated lazily at his sides as the soft hum of the ocean settled around them. Let's go home, Garnet said. Stephen nodded. His eyes drifted toward the stars as they floated beneath the calm night sky. His heartbeat steadied. The ocean's quiet rhythm carried them toward the shore. The ocean's surface shimmered beneath the pale moonlight as they drifted toward the shore. Stephen's body felt weightless, his arms moving lazily at his sides as the gentle current pulled them closer to land. Pearl swam beside him, her hand steady on his shoulder, while Garnet and Amethyst floated slightly ahead, the tension in their bodies slowly fading. Stephen's fingers curled around the crystal shard. Its warmth pulsed faintly against his palm, no longer sharp or wild, just steady and calm. He glanced toward Garnet, whose visor reflected the soft light of the stars above. So, Amethyst's voice broke the quiet. That was pretty intense, huh? Stephen gave a tired laugh. Yeah, you really handled yourself out there, Garnet said. That connection you made, it's rare. Stephen's chest tightened. He glanced down at the shard in his hand. I didn't even know what I was doing. It just happened. Pearl swam closer. Her hand brushed his arm. You trusted your instincts, she said softly, and you saved it. Stephen smiled faintly. The soft sound of waves lapping against the shore grew louder as the beach came into view. The sand shimmered beneath the moonlight, the cliffs rising dark and quiet in the distance. Stephen's feet touched the sandy bottom as the water shallowed. He stumbled slightly as he stood, his legs shaky beneath him. Pearl steadied him with a hand on his back. Amethyst waded up behind them, tossing her hair back. Wow! She stretched her arms over her head. You know, I think we earned some snacks after that one. Stephen laughed. Yeah, maybe. Garnet stepped onto the shore, the wet sand sticking to her boots. We should get back to the temple, she said. You need rest. Stephen nodded, brushing his damp hair away from his face. The crystal shard pulsed faintly in his hand. He held it up to the moonlight, watching the soft pink glow dance across the smooth surface. Do you think, Stephen hesitated, do you think there are more like this out there? Garnet's gaze sharpened beneath her visor. It's possible, she said. We'll need to be ready. Pearl's brow furrowed. If the corruption is spreading, then we'll handle it, Garnet said firmly. Stephen's chest tightened. He looked down at the shard. Its glow felt familiar now, not threatening, just quiet. We'll figure it out, Stephen said. Together. Amethyst's arm draped around his shoulders. Yeah, we've got this. Pearl smiled softly. Stephen sighed, the weight of the night beginning to settle in his chest. His arms felt heavy, his heartbeat slowing to match the calm pulse of the ocean behind them. They made their way toward the temple in quiet steps. The sand gave way beneath Stephen's feet, the cold air brushing gently against his damp skin. Stephen's eyes drifted toward the stars above. His hand closed around the shard as his breath settled into an even rhythm. Tomorrow, Garnet said as they reached the base of the cliff, we'll figure out what happens next. Stephen smiled faintly. His eyelids felt heavy now. His heart steadied beneath the quiet hum of the shard. Yeah, Stephen whispered. They stepped into the temple. The soft glow of the crystal wall welcomed them, casting warm light along the stone. Stephen sat down at the base of the crystal spire, his back resting against the cool surface. Pearl knelt beside him, brushing her hand over his hair. Amethyst flopped down nearby, stretching her arms behind her head. Garnet stood at the entrance, her gaze calm beneath her visor. Stephen's hand rested over the shard as the warmth of the temple wrapped around him. His breath slowed. The pulse of the crystal faded into quiet stillness. Stephen's eyes fluttered closed. The ocean's rhythm lingered in his mind as sleep pulled him beneath its calm surface. Stephen's breath deepened as the steady pulse of the shard quieted in his hand. The soft glow of the temple lights shimmered across the smooth crystal walls, casting faint shadows along the floor. The night outside stretched quiet and endless, the sound of the ocean's waves rolling gently through the open doorway. Pearl sat beside Stephen, her hands resting on her lap as she watched his eyelids flutter. His hand was still curled loosely around the shard, his chest rising and falling in slow, even breaths. Amethyst was sprawled out on her back nearby, arms and legs stretched in every direction. So, Amethyst's voice was lazy and soft. What exactly was that thing down there? Pearl's brow furrowed. I'm not sure, she admitted. It felt ancient, like the corruption had been buried deep within it for centuries. And Stephen just fixed it? Amethyst grinned. Pretty cool. Pearl's gaze softened as she glanced at Stephen's sleeping face. Yes, it was. Garnet stood by the entrance, arms crossed. Her visor reflected the faint light of the moon outside. It's not over, she said quietly. Pearl's eyes sharpened. You think there's more? Garnet's gaze didn't waver. That corruption wasn't random. Something triggered it. Amethyst's smile faded. So you're saying someone caused it? Or something. Garnet's voice was steady. But whatever it is, we'll be ready. Stephen stirred slightly in his sleep. The shard in his hand pulsed faintly, a soft pink light curling through his fingers. Pearl's hand brushed over his hair, her expression softening. "He's growing stronger?" she whispered. "Yeah." Amethyst's smile returned. "He's kinda awesome." Garnet's gaze lingered on Stephen's peaceful face. "He's ready." Outside, the sound of the ocean hummed softly through the open doorway. The cool night breeze stirred the edges of the temple's walls, perhaps mingling with the quiet pulse of the crystal spire behind them. Stephen's breath steadied as sleep pulled him deeper. The warmth of the shard curled through his hand, quiet and steady. His heartbeat matched the soft rhythm of the ocean's waves. Outside, beneath the pale light of the moon, the ocean stretched out calm and endless. But deep beneath the surface, something stirred. Far beyond the reach of light, in the dark places beneath the ocean's floor, thin cracks glowed faintly with violet light. A slow, pulsing rhythm echoed through the depths. The ocean trembled. Stephen's breath hitched softly in his sleep. The shard pulsed once beneath his hand, and the night stretched on, quiet and endless beneath the stars.